Greetings, Mr. and Mrs. Middle America and all the ships at sea. This is Ian Punnett. And to the hostile invading alien armies floating gently across the U.S.-Canadian border. Remember, eat the Canadians first. We'll get more into that coming up next hour with the paranormal detective and Greg Lawson. We're going to go through some parallels of some of the most famous cases and how this one here is being described in the last couple of weeks. In fact, just yesterday, perhaps you heard that the Pentagon came out and said, oh, well, you know, we'll probably never know what 3 out of 4 of those were. We just blowed them up real good. And the pieces are scattered too far and wide or have sunk too deep to the bottom of the ocean for us to ever really be able to tell you what it was. But, you know, we blew them up. That's what you wanted. I don't know what we can believe yet. We'll talk more about that coming up with Greg. But listen, perhaps you caught some of the news in the last 24 hours out of this summit in Germany, where right now countries are recommitting their efforts to helping Ukraine fight off Russia. There is some discussion about whether or not there are concessions that could be made that could end this war early, or whether it's even right to be discussing concessions with an invading army like Russia pounding at Ukraine. Still, now the threat that along with the Wagner Group, this mafia-like organization, which has been hired to commit crimes all throughout the border between Russia and Ukraine, and these sort of, you know, these murderers, these rapists, these criminals that they let out of prison to join a force which has been flagging. The Russian military has suffered greatly. So now they're getting even more desperate, and there's talk about flyovers from jets to bomb Ukrainian cities. And now there's talking about whether we should be providing F-16s to help supply the Ukrainian military or support the Ukrainian military in its efforts to repel these ever dangerous plans that Putin has, it would seem, to try to win this war or at least save his face. So there were discussions today about labeling this now from here on forward war crimes. There's nothing that can justify this as a war. This silly claim that Russia was saving Ukraine from Nazis, we all know it was balderdash. We knew it from the beginning. But we don't have to live it. For us, it's more of a parlor game. We can watch it on television. We can read about it in the news. But somebody who we spoke with about 6 months ago here on Coast to Coast is right in the middle of it. And she and I remain friendly, and I ask about her all the time. I'm worried about her all the time. She'll join us next for an update from Ukraine. Media personality Nadiya Vasina, live on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. I had to even check to make sure, because it felt like we just talked to her not too long ago. It was back in October when we talked to Nadiya Vasina, who is a Ukrainian, or was a Ukrainian gymnast. I don't know how much she still does of gymnastics. An entertainer, a member of a gold medal winning sort of pan-European gymnastics team between 2002 and 2008, and lived in Chicago for a while and was voted the most beautiful woman in Ukraine in 2012, and she remains the most beautiful woman in our hearts. Nadiya Vasina, good to talk to you again.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on your show, and good night, America.
Yeah, well, so, you know, you get the occasional message from me when I'm extra special worried about you. So thank you for always writing back and assuring me you're okay. And I saw some of your videos. We've aired some things that you have sent to us. Tell me where you are, how things are in Kyiv right now, and what do you feel is the greatest threat coming your way in the near future from Russia?
Well, if we talk about Kiev, these days are amazing. Yes, we always have air sirens, and always we are under threat of the attack by the missiles. But from another thing, I never thought that I would be so much happy about driving along the city and see the light in the city, you know?
Yeah.
All these days, Kiev, megapolis, before big war, big invasion, it was 5 million people living here. It was like a very, a big, bright, successful city with a lot of cars and everything. And all, winter, we pretty much didn't have lights. So when you drive the city, you cannot see the road normally because the lights are turned off.
Oh.
Because Russia did attack the Ukrainian heating system, lighting system, electricity, all that stuff, and they tried to destroy it. So in winter, we're not going to have light, not going to have heating and everything. So our government and mayor of Kiev, Vitaly Klitschko, our boxer, world famous, they did everything to make Ukrainians and people in Kiev to be with heating and light, not the whole day. For example, in Kiev, the cutoff was you can have 6 hours light and then 10 hours no light. Then again, 4 hours light you have, and then 5 hours without light.
Right.
So people already made their plans how to
get by. How to get by. Yeah.
Yeah. So for these days, I was driving Krushatik. This is the main street, Maidan, and it was light. And I was like, oh, my gosh, I see commercials. I see people going on the street, and because when there is no light, there is no sense to be outside.
Right. Yeah. So when was the last time? I mean, there was a while ago when missiles were hitting buildings right near where you lived. Are you still seeing that regularly, or are the missiles coming to a different place in Ukraine?
Thanks God to after those was 2 missiles and 5 or 6 drones, which destroyed lots of buildings in front of me. After that, around me, it was not so much close. Well, actually, it's always close. You know, there is, I don't know, after how many times? You're waking up in the morning and you hear a huge explosion and you're shaking because you're sleeping and then and you're waking up and just trying to understand what's going on. And sometimes it's hard to understand where is it. Because, for example, less than 1 kilometer, it always get hit something with the missiles. And usually, important thing, Russia claims that they make surgical strikes on military places.
Right.
But they make surgical strikes on civilian houses.
Right.
So people are sleeping, and the missiles, they launch missiles straight in the houses where people are. And it's 1 kilo. If it's 50 meters from you, your house is shaking and you barely can understand what's going on, where to run and what to do. When it's less than 1 kilometer, and when you live in so much high, again, the feeling is horrible, and you're waking up and you run okay, what's going on? What am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to run? So, but I want to say to air protection system, Ukrainian soldiers, they do an amazing job. Oh my gosh, I don't know. Are
you still volunteering with them? Are you still helping? You were kind of helping with their morale.
Oh yeah, I was in the front lines 1 month ago.
Okay.
I was in Donetsk area in Avdiivka. I bought a vehicle. I brought some gifts, to boys.
Right.
Because we're not saying exactly what. And I was visiting civilians. A lot of civilians didn't leave Avdiivka. Avdiivka is also one of the hottest parts for all these 9 years. It's a little bit difficult to get there because sometimes you cannot get at the city because of the Russian attacks. So
Right.
they launch every time with something, and you just with your vehicle. Sometimes you have to be whatever, in a specific.
I understand.
Yeah.
What is the spirit like these days with the Ukrainian people? How do they are they feeling the pressure to give in? Are they even more ready to fight?
Well, I will tell you what. We had, if we'll go back to the history, more than 30 wars was between Russia and Ukraine. More than 30 times, if we go back to the history, Russia was attacking and trying to make us do what Russia wants to. So I think, and I hope, and what all Ukrainians, I hope, is going to be the final battle in history. So we need to destroy Russia as Russia is right now existing, because this country lives it's toxic country, it's toxic people, it's toxic
Right.
nation, it's toxic government, it's toxic relationships between them inside the country. And for example, if you listen attentively to the news or to the Russian TV presenters, to Russian liars, you will hear very important things. What they claim, they asking, as you told before, prisoners to go on war,
Right.
civilians to go on war, and they say it's better to die on war rather than die being at your home by being drunk by vodka or drugs.
Right.
And I'm thinking, like, why? Why there is no other choice?
Yeah, are those your two? If we would say if those are your two options, you don't have very good choices, right? I mean that.
Yeah. And they always claim again on Russian TV that death is good.
Yeah.
Like, how you can say that? And this is their ideology,
Yeah.
So,
well, and you were very. I mean, we're talking with Nadiya Vasina, who's a Ukrainian media personality, somebody who's lived for a while in the United States, specifically in Chicago. But you were on Russian television. Is your mother Russian? I mean, you had connections to the old USSR when you were an entertainer, didn't you?
No, I was. My mom was in the Soviet Union. She was an athlete running,
Right.
and Soviet Union was destroyed, or how to say that, in 1991, and
Right.
I was born in 1989.
Okay.
So I didn't.
But I mean, weren't you on television in Russia for a while? Weren't you in? Didn't
no,
you?
Maybe it was some short appearances on TV before 2014. Yes,
Like Russia's Got Talent or something. It says in a biography I read of you that you competed.
It was a long time ago, yeah.
Okay, but I just mean you're not. It's not like you grew up hating Russia, but you can't live in a country like Ukraine and not feel like Russia doesn't deserve to be taken apart for what it's trying to do to your country.
Well, there is one important thing. As thanks God, because of my job, I was traveling all over the world, and I had experience with talking to different people and to see different countries and everything. Every time when I was going to Russia before 2014, what I felt from them, they always looking from above on you. They always saying like, "Oh, we are better. We are more powerful. We are your big brother." Like, "Oh, and you are Ukrainians." Like, okay, who you are? So they talk with the threaten, with the pressure, with all this, and I never understood. Even when you said about this show, when I get to this show, one thing was I wanted just to throw away the contract and leave this country, because how mean and rude they are. It's not like they're yelling at you every time. No, but it goes from inside. If Americans see each other, you smile, you say, how you doing? Bye. Yes? In
Right.
Russia, no. if you look eye to eye, from eye to eye to each other, they're like, "What are you looking at me? Like,
right.
what?"
Right. They are suspicious that you're up to something.
Yeah, exactly. And we are not like that. So,
right.
And I was thinking about why they say that we are like neighbors or brothers, or like we were so different always. But Soviet Union and all this system was trying to make like, let's make a great Soviet Union, let's destroy America and blah, blah, blah. And that in America did have microwaves, did have big shows, did have planes and everything, and we didn't have even normal clothing in the stores. Like, are you kidding me? So from that, it goes from that.
Okay. So I want to, we'll give the phone number out here for people to call in a little bit later in this hour, but I did have one or two other questions. So, now we're talking about giving F-16s, right, good fighter jets to Ukraine, or flying them ourselves. I don't know which one is which. And the thought that we have declared as of today, and the world community agreed, that at this point, anybody who's still fighting for Russia and all of this is just a war criminal. They're just committing war crimes at this point, because there is no war. There's no reason for this to be happening. They could stop tomorrow. They could just turn around and go home. There's nothing that's compelling them to stay in this war. So between declaring the effort to be a criminal enterprise, right, to claim that the war is really just a criminal act, or getting F-16s, which one is more important right now to the Ukrainian people?
I think H-16.
Okay.
Because we realize one thing, that the world doesn't understand what's going on. The world taking it, like you said before, like a movie. You're watching it like a movie and like, right. I'll be next.
Right.
Like, give me popcorn.
Right. It's true.
Yeah, it's true. And we are fighting, and we do understand what we can do by our own hands. We know what we can do because we have our good government and president and our air forces and all our army and all our volunteers. And we're like, okay, give us weapons, and that's it. That's all we need right now.
Right.
And because from 2014, when I was going to the front line, it was the battle for Donetsk Airport. It was the battle, very big, horrible battles. And our ex-president Poroshenko was going to G7, and not only, and he was talking, showing the proof that we have war. World, please support us, protect us, help us somehow, or at least open your eyes. And the world was like, oh, we are so sad about it, that we have war and blah, blah, blah. Right. But if we go back to the history, Ukraine gave the nuclear weapon to Russia by signing the document. If something's going to go wrong, Russia going to protect us. Or if something's going to go wrong, America, Britain, and other countries going to protect us. But what we see in reality, Ukraine at the beginning of war, big war, full scale, was begging, please give us weapons, because we don't have enough weapon. No matter how much we try, how much we work, we cannot have so much weapon. The whole world don't have so much weapon as we need in this war. So that's why.
Okay, I accept that. I mean, and I understand that, and I think there was a belief, it was prominent, that it was better not to, that Putin was too dangerous and too unpredictable. Now I think the feeling has changed. I think there's still a feeling that he may have some sort of terminal disease, and that if he dies, the successor will stop this war. Do you feel the same way, that if Putin dies, the next leader of Russia will say, okay, enough, and bring everybody home?
I'm sure, yes, because I know that the government of Russia is full of psychos and unpredictable people. It really is. Like
a government of psychos. See, now you couldn't say that if you hadn't lived in Chicago. Those are the kind of American language skills that you can only pick up if you live in the United States at one point. All right, hang on, Nadiya. We'll come back. I want to give the phone numbers so people can join the conversation. Nadiya Vasina, Ukrainian media personality and the daughter of the guy who started some of the biggest radio stations in Ukraine. So we have a connection there, too. And we'd love to have you connect with her next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. I think most of the world is now finally waking up to the point where we are going to be taking more action to try to spare Ukraine further pain. Russia's had plenty of chances. It just any excuse they've had, anything about people saying, "Oh, they're boxed in a corner, they had to do," it just doesn't exist anymore. Now it's just ego. Now, if it was anything more than ego, which it probably wasn't anyway, but it's just one of those things where right now, people like Nadiya Vasina, who's our guest live from Ukraine, I mean, they're counting on the end of the missile launches. They're counting on something coming in and stopping these Russian jets from being able to crisscross Ukraine and target more civilian places. Clearly, they're not worried about whether or not these have military value. So that's why we throw out the numbers. Grab one. You can join the conversation. She's waiting for you next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. So we got some people who are hanging on, and we've got, I'm looking forward to it, too, several of you who want to talk with Nadiya Vasina. I should also mention, coming up at the top of the hour, the paranormal detective, Greg Lawson. He's an expert on both Roswell, but he's written several other stories. He's been tracking a lot of what we would ordinarily talk about on Coast to Coast. He's been a previous guest, and I'd love to have him reflect on what he's been seeing in the news. What are the parallels in the way in which the Pentagon has been talking about these balloons to what he was either researching in the past with Roswell or in other aspects of his investigations? We'll find out more about that coming up next hour on Coast to Coast AM. But while we have her, let's go to Carl, who's in Boston on Coast to Coast AM for Ukrainian media personality Nadiya Vasina. Go ahead, Carl.
Hi, Nadiya. Hi, Ian. Thank you for taking my call. Nadiya, I just had two quick questions. How are you doing? I empathize with you, and I feel sorry for you, but I ask you, what more is America helping, and what more can be done worldwide? Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Well, what can the world do? For example, my personal experience as being a volunteer on the front lines for, 9 years, it's hard to imagine. Every day, war takes a lot of things. For example, when I go to the front lines, I bring, for example, a night vision system, or I bring vehicle or wherever. And after attacks by Russians, everything what I brought, it can be destroyed in a moment. When it's just vehicles and everything, the most important soldiers are alive. But then the next day you're waking up and you're like, okay, I need to pick all these things again and go and buy it. But
right.
Now you can buy it when you. When I was performing in America, I had good money and I was okay. Before big invasion, I was earning money in Ukraine and I could invest in soldiers. But now, when we don't have normal jobs, the prices are higher. You're running between missiles and light outages, and then you have to go and buy a vehicle which costs $5,000. Or you have to buy night vision system or any other thing. So you're like, oh my gosh!
It adds up. Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you only bring them night vision glasses, or occasionally do they get a bottle of something to keep them warm at night?
Yeah, everything. It's so many things. It started from some little things for their weapon, like, I don't know, all these technical things, on English, what's the name? But from vehicles to very good military clothing. Again, government helps a lot. Really, they do really a lot. But it's war. Every second war takes away something.
Right.
So I buy everything from clothing to vehicles to weapons to drones. I always buy drones, and drones are not like cheap. It's like also $1,000, and sometimes some cigarettes, because boys really love cigarettes.
I bet.
Yeah,
a lot of cigarettes.
Yeah, so it all takes finances, emotions, your physical feelings. And after previous my trip to the front lines, I get to the hospital, and like around 1 week I was in the hospital because it was a funny story, very short. I bought a car. And we were driving out from Kiev, and the vehicle was full of clothing for soldiers and civilians. And when we went out, the heating system in the vehicle get broken. And it's night, -10 in the vehicle, -10 outside. So for 2 days and 2 nights, I was driving in this vehicle with no possibility to turn on the heating because it's broken. And in Avdiivka, there were no people who can repair my vehicle. So I get frozen so much, and all my muscles and everything in my body. Yeah, so I get from there, and I get to hospital by emergency. So it's like you're helping, you're doing good things, but there is a backside of it. So we need help of everything, from some things which I can buy in American, be delivered here, to emotional, media, financial support, everything.
Right.
We need that.
All right. We'll try to support you better. David is in New Mexico for Ukrainian media personality Nadiya Vasina. Go ahead, David.
Yeah. Hi, Nadiya. I spoke with you. I was lucky enough to speak with you the last time you were on Coast to Coast in October. And I asked you about what the relationship was like between you and your gymnast peers in Russia. And this time I'd like to ask you, I've been wondering what the missed opportunity. Oh, and by the way, I just looked at your Instagram story. I follow you on Instagram. I see you did a show recently. What were the missed opportunities, if any, to talk this out rather than fight it out? I'm going to speculate that maybe Russia made some demands, whether legitimate or illegitimate, and we'll suppose they're illegitimate, and those demands were not met, and so they decided to fight. But what were the possibilities, if any, to talk this out in years past to avoid the fighting that we're in now?
Could this have been avoided? Yeah.
No. We talked before about it. It goes from the history. It was always like that. And before we really did try to explain them. Even those people, when Donetsk was already under Russia, they turned off Ukrainian TV there, and they turned on Russian TV. And Russian TV is very toxic, and they zombified Ukrainians who are living in occupied Donetsk and Crimea. So people can't think by themselves. Russians were living under these toxic TV presenters, under this toxic news about NATO, about Nazism in Ukraine, what sounds so silly, so stupid, so even funny, I don't know. So
but it works. It works, and a lot of Russian people believe it.
Yeah, this is the thing. And when, for example, you have relatives in Russia, and when big invasion started, they started to text us. Oh, okay, Ukrainians, we're going to bomb this city. We're going to occupy Kharkiv, Kiev. We're going to destroy your government. And that's it. We're going to save you, Ukrainians. Gotcha? And we're like, what? Like, wait, we're sitting under missiles, and the Russians missiles. Why are you being so mean and rude? You're attacking us. And they're like, no, we're not attacking us. We're saving you from your government, and you are now stupid Ukrainians, but we're going to show you how to live normally. So for them, as I told you before, normal way of living is this, being always mean, rude. On TV they say that attitude, that
Right.
war is peace.
Right.
War, peace. This is the ideology. So we did try, but it never worked out. And right now, this is it. No conversations, nothing. We have to defeat them, and that's it.
I think we have time for two more questions. Cliff is in Oklahoma City. Cliff, you had a question for Nadiya Vasina from Ukraine.
Hi, Ian. I want to ask Nadiya, how many billions of dollars do we have to continue to send your country while our country is having all kinds of problems that aren't being taken care of, but somehow we have to save you all?
We don't have to. We just should, right?
We just should? Well, I mean, there's a lot of different people out in the world, a lot of different countries that are having all kinds of problems and being oppressed as well.
Yeah.
I guess we have to send them hundreds of billions of dollars.
No, we don't have to. We can. If we think about wait, hold on, dude. I mean, come on, that's rude. So I mean, if you want to be polite to the guests, that's fine, but that's not polite.
All right. Well,
I mean, it's not. Well, wait. Just keep your shirt on. I'm saying to you, we don't have to. You're saying it in a very cynical way. We have to. We don't have to. But we're going to. If you look at the polls, I think most people would agree it's wrong when a sovereign country is invaded. Now, of all of the people on the planet, Putin is one I will stand up against any day of the week. He's a murderer. Do you want to see him become more empowered and commit more murders on foreign soils because he can? I don't. And I think that's the lesson that we learned from placating him before. To go to your point, Cliff, we didn't step up before, and now this is where we are. What would it have what might have happened if we had stood up to him earlier, say 10 years ago, and said, no, you can't do this? But we didn't. So that's why we are where we are.
We make all these things happen. We, by our hands, building the world we are living in. So, and if, for example, an Oklahoma would, I am sure nothing like that would happen, but if people would feel where we feel, then everything goes very understandable. And this is why, for example, my mission, it sounds very loud, but what I feel, if I can help people, I do help people, because no one knows what's going to be tomorrow. No one knows what's going to be with Europe, Canada, America, Ukraine, Russia tomorrow. So we have to build a better world to live. We have to. I think we have to. And when Ukrainians went with a special mission to take Americans from the, remember it was the operation like during COVID, I think, when Americans were leaving Iran? Yes, or Iraq? I'm sorry, I don't remember. And
right.
America did not take their people, so Ukrainians went there. And
so there are other times when Ukraine has come in and helped, and now this is kind of like payback, I guess.
Yeah, so it's normal things. Of course, I do understand Americans. They're like, oh, why we pay this money? We can spend it on ourselves and everything. But we're talking not just about Ukraine. We're talking about basically the world, because the next country is going to be Romania or Poland. Okay, what's going to be next? Like, let's stop it and let's build a world when we should not spend money on any weapons. We should not give so much energy on building a super dangerous weapon and killing people. So I think that if we all together be going to unite and we will stop it as soon as possible, no one will spend that much money. And we pay by our lives, by our blood, children dying, people dying, women dying like myself. A lot of people don't have any place to live. A lot of people struggling, not having arms, legs. Some people oh my gosh, so much horrible after attacks. So it's a horrible.
And there's no reason. There's no reason for this. It's really mass murder is what it is, and there's no reason for it. And I think it's just morally wrong. But we have time for one more call. Bruce is on a first-time caller line from Massachusetts on Coast to Coast AM for Nadiya Vasina from Ukraine. Go ahead, Bruce.
Hi, Nadiya.
Hi.
Nostrovia. Listen, I believe what's going on there is basically what Hitler did to the Jews, and we stood back and we waited too long to do the right thing. I believe that you need help, but we can't really put any boots on the ground there. But we do have to support you, even though we need to close our own borders over here to keep people out that aren't supposed to be here. But you guys are being violated over there. Putin emptied his prisons and sent in criminals to kill you people. And I'm glad you guys mopped the floor with them.
Yeah.
And you keep on the good fight because I believe in right is might. You got rid of the bad guys in your government, right? And keep getting rid of them. That's what we got to do over here. We have to fight the same war that you're fighting, almost, but not. We don't want it to become what you have been subjected to. And I really feel bad for you people over there.
Well, we'll have to leave that there as we're coming up to the top of the hour. Nadiya, I don't know if you knew that, if you heard that expression.
Yeah, I did.
Mop the floor is an old American expression for using somebody treating them like a broom or treating them like that. They never get up off the floor because you kept them down, and I think that's where a lot of people are hoping Ukraine is going to get in this position where they're going to beat back Russia once and for all, and Russia will never try this again. Somebody asked a question I want to ask you. Is there any fear that this is going to escalate into World War III?
Well, if people would stand aside, and if the world basically not going to believe like India, they're natural, or like other countries, if the world still would believe that everything can stop on Ukraine, yes, it could be. Because, again, we have dealing with the psycho people in the government of Russia.
Yeah.
So nobody knows what can happen. Nobody could imagine that it's going to be the full scale. Our army was ready. Government was ready. But till the last moment, we could not imagine that. Imagine that such a huge country going to invade like 4 times, 5 times smaller country than, not 5 times, like 20 times smaller than Ukraine.
Ukraine being, and Russia has threatened to use, nuclear tactical missiles on Ukraine in order to win. And I think it just goes to show you that, again, this is much more about Putin's ego than any justifiable cause. So I'm with you. And I think most people in America are with you. And hopefully if Putin does die sometime soon, as some reports have indicated that he is very ill, that his successor will pull back and realize this was never worth it, and that in order to avoid further wrath from the world, they won't try that again.
Well, the whole world has to stop him altogether, because let's go back to John Lennon's singing. Yes?
Imagine. Well, we'll have to leave it there for now, but I will be in touch, and your safety is paramount, and your family and your friends and your country, men and women and the children and all, and I just hope that we can get to a resolution sooner than another 6 months before we be back again. So hopefully next time we'll talk to you, it's because you're opened up for tourism, and we can all come and visit you in Ukraine. All right. I'll be thinking about you. Stay safe. Coming up, the paranormal detective, Greg Lawson on Coast to Coast AM. This is everybody's collecting data. Everywhere you go, somebody is doing a deep dive on your data, right? And a lot of times it's what you agree to. We kind of blindly sometimes sign off on these agreements when we sign up for something new, or we can choose to try and go through the long list of the cookie menu or something. If we're on a site we've never been to before, we decide what they can and can't do. It's kind of exhausting. Data mining is everywhere, and collecting data on ourselves and on other countries seems to be what's behind a lot of modern technological espionage, right? And then brings up the TikTok story. Lots of governments, including my own state government here in Kansas, forbids people to have TikTok on any government-owned device. And I think we're wise to be mindful about the origin and the intent of the creators of something that say, just tell us a little bit about yourself. This kind of media literacy is something that is in short supply, but I'm working on it. We talk about media literacy all the time in classes, and what we do have a right to stand up and say, no, I'm not going to accept that. Which may be all that was in play with this whole low-flying or high-flying, as it were, surveillance system that came in the form of balloons over the United States, not just recently, but apparently, several that flew over the country without either being noticed or without any response from the government in the last administration. They're kind of everywhere. We can say with some certainty, I guess, that we're not doing it to other countries, but that's only because our satellites are so good that the balloons gathering data wouldn't tell us anything more than we can gather with other systems. Maybe China's different. Maybe they've got a different game they're running with those balloons, and maybe they're not balloons at all. Now, that's the part that kind of catches our attention. Maybe these different shaped balloons moving so slowly, even at the speed of wind, maybe they weren't sent from other governments. Right now, the Pentagon says we may never know what 3 out of the 4 that we shot down actually were. But it's that idea of the weather balloon that makes, I think, anybody who follows crypto history sit up and take notice, because balloons, weather balloons, military balloons of any sort, this is something we've been sold for a very long time. So I thought we'd go back to Roswell a little bit, and we'll talk about balloons, and then also further investigate maybe some other parallels in the ways in which balloons are often used as an excuse for something more nefarious. And we'll do that with Greg Lawson next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Greg Lawson is a friend of Dave Schrader, who's been on the show often, the host of the show The Holzer Files, and then The Ghosts of Devil's Perch, which we had Dave on talking about a couple of times. Greg has a long history investigating and exploring and researching things which people consider to be paranormal. And he discusses these topics when he goes out on the lecture circuit. Glad he gave us some time tonight. Greg, how are you this evening?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Well, come on. We're the ones who are lucky. You're just kind of the perfect guy for this gig, because I think that not just with your background in your investigations with Roswell, but you've done other things. You've had other books where you've done like the I saw in your website, the Haunted Hill House was like totally cool. I love that. And that you can lecture on all sorts of various topics. So we may run the gamut with you, but let's start here. Okay. So you've been following the story of the balloons, these different shaped balloons. Some were cigar-shaped, some were this shape, some were big, some were small. Yeah. What were you hearing in that, all of those different admissions or repivots by the Pentagon over the last couple of weeks?
Well, it's funny because if you look back in the last couple of years, they've changed some laws and they've put some stuff in the National Defense Authorization Act that opens up some of these investigations and makes it very much more transparent. Before, if a Navy flyer saw something, he would think, do I really want to report this? Because they're going to make fun of me. Right. And when he would, that information stayed within the Department of the Navy. It was not shared, in the national defense. So now the laws have changed, and they have to play well with others, and everybody is sharing this information. Also, they've opened it up to where it's our responsibility as the government to look at this and to share annually our report on UAP. So you have all these government agencies that are now sharing this information, working together, and they're compelled to do it, which makes it fairly interesting there.
Yeah, that's a very interesting observation to start with because, as I mentioned last night, there's a Hulu series out, which is like a primer on the history of this subject in this country and how it developed, and there was a concerted effort made by the government, an actual symposia that they had across the country of different thought leaders to make sure that everybody got in line with the notion that people would be stigmatized if they spoke up, and therefore anybody in the military, officers, pilots, they didn't want that permanently in their jacket. Up until that point, sometime in I think it was the 1950s, up until that point, people were talking openly about it. Then that shut down, and they were basically the rule came out that said, let's label them all kooks, and that will stop everything. And then it's taken a long time for that frost to thaw. So now the emphasis is not prove you're not a kook. It's the emphasis is for the government to prove that what people are reporting isn't true.
Right. Yeah, and it's when you're talking about aerial phenomena, you're talking about a whole bunch of stuff. When I was a kid, 1970, North Austin, Texas, every day I saw a flying disc every day, because we lived very close to Bergstrom Air Force Base, which was the SAC command at the time. And so they were launching weather balloons multiple times a day. And once they got very, very high, those balloons that look like an upside down teardrop to us on the ground get very big, right? They get very, very wide.
Sure.
And so you see, and boy, around 4, 5, 6, 7 o'clock, depending on what time of the year, you get those long sun rays as they're coming up, and they reflect off of that balloon material, and it looks like a giant, shiny silver disc up there, right?
Right.
So we had a lot of those. I remember that crystal clear when I was a kid. So you have things such, benign as that, to these other objects that apparently, maneuver very well and are hard to spot. But
let's freeze that moment, because again, there seemed to be a time when this country, the military, needed to send up a lot more weather balloons. I'm not saying that they don't do it on occasion. I'm not saying, but it's not. I mean, the technology has progressed since then. The climatology and meteorology and all that has progressed to a point where we don't need to send up a balloon. I mean, that's pretty primal in a way when you think about it, right?
Right.
So
I guess it would be more along the lines of now as far as real test, because I mean, using models and satellites, you can't actually get the real air. You can't test the real air, so you still need air pressure and those types of things that the satellite's not going to give you.
True, but they also we have a lot of different planes. They have the AWACS. We have other things that we can also do other than weather balloons, at least if the Pentagon's to be believed. And they said, and I believe them when they say, we don't really fly balloons over other countries. So let's just go with the balloon theory for a second, that all of this is just balloons. So makes me wonder, what is it then that China doesn't have that we have, that a weather balloon or a balloon of some sort, whether it's for weather or not, I don't know. But if whatever a balloon is, that they feel like they have to float it over the jet stream over the United States and Canada, what is it that they're gathering with those balloons that they couldn't gather using other data? Because our country says our satellites are so good, balloons are kind of we just wouldn't bother.
Right.
So where are you with that?
Well, and so it depends on how you look at it. And depends on the technology we're talking about. Do you remember a few years ago we were watching North Korea pretty close, and all of a sudden they're burning everything, and there's nothing but smoke over there.
Right.
They were moving surface-to-air missiles from one launch area to another. So the best way to do that is to create smoke, because it's really hard for us to see through smoke. And so that sort of archaic warfare kind of stuff was going on.
Seemingly,
yeah. And here's the thing: is we're assuming that this balloon was gathering data of some sort, possibly espionage kind of stuff,
right?
Well, what if it wasn't? What if it was doing something else? And that was one of the things that kind of perturbed me a little bit. Is we can fabricate things pretty quick, and we can control things in a lot of different ways. And to bring a balloon down with a very high dollar missile was just I'm just sitting at home.
$400,000 missile to knock down a balloon.
What are we doing? Who is in charge of this?
Right.
If I had the authority and I had the responsibility to for somebody to say, "Hey, I need you to go get that balloon," that's not how I'm going to do it.
No.
And I want to protect the payload of that balloon and keep it pristine, so I can get people that's a lot smarter than me to take a look at it and figure out what it's doing. But instead, they shoot a missile at it over the ocean, and it's going to drop into salt water. Whatever electronics is on it is done.
Instantly done,
Yeah, and then how are you going to find it, and how are you going to recover it? I don't know how they're doing with that part of this.
No, I think it was all theater, I think, at some point, and it became, it obviously became very politicized. Like, we don't have the guts to shoot down a balloon, and then after we shot down the balloon, they go, "Oh, what a stupid waste of money to shoot down a balloon." It's like, make up your mind. I mean, like, what do you want? The government's going to do whatever it thinks the people think will make them look good. They're not necessarily going to think it through. And you're a guy who knows a little bit about this because, I mean, you served about a decade in the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. Were those in successive events, or were you at the same time in all three of those?
So out of high school, Army, then I became a cop when I got out of the Army, and I was doing that for a little while, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to go do the Navy. A buddy of mine called me up and said, "Hey, let's go do the Navy." So we went and did the Navy. I got out and went, I'm going to be a cop again, and then I was there for a couple of years, and the Bosnia thing came up, and I was like, I'm going to go do the Air Force. And so
What were your jobs in each of those stints?
So when I was in the Army, I was an infantry parachutist. I was a paratrooper with the 82nd Airborne Division. I was in Alaska and the Middle East and North Africa, and I had a really good tour with them.
Good.
Traveled around a lot.
And then the Navy?
And then the Navy, I was an operations specialist. And that's one of the things that makes me more interested in these UAPs, UFOs, and that sort of thing, because as an operations specialist, it's one of the very few jobs in the Navy that you're not a technician. You don't fix anything. Most jobs in the Navy, you fix something. Operations specialists don't fix anything. We use a whole bunch of electronic means to gather information. We analyze that information and disseminate it to the people that have a need to know for the information. And so that was one of the things, I worked air detection and tracking in one of the modules on Nimitz, air detection and tracking. This was way before the UAP incident. I'm using air quotes here on Nimitz.
Right.
But the equipment that we use there, I think people have a very basic and rudimentary idea of how those things work.
Right.
But let's say the electronic countermeasures and electronic countermeasures and the radars and things that we use RF energy for to do things without having to touch things, those are frequencies, and those frequencies can be adjusted. So for me and for anybody that's working air detection and tracking, as we're going someplace and doing something, we're looking for objects that are of interest to us. In other words, a hazard of navigation or a direct threat, right?
Yeah.
And when you run into flocks of birds, you adjust your frequency. You tune your radar, right? So that they'll go away on your radar screen so you don't see them and you don't get distracted by them. Well, the same thing would happen with a non-rigid inflatable balloon type object. You could pick that up. If the payload was big enough, like this particular payload on this Chinese balloon was apparently a couple of school bus sizes. I mean, that's a lot of equipment. I can't imagine how big this thing was, but apparently it was pretty large.
Right.
And, something like that, you wouldn't necessarily tune it out. You would automatically see that. Some of these others that they've been talking about, the smaller ones, you would probably, if you couldn't get a signature off of that flying object, whatever it is. In other words, you're looking for it, and is it in a commercial air corridor? Is it moving at a certain speed, at a certain altitude? Is it squawking some sort of radar also, or any other RF energy for transmitting, whatever it might be? You can identify that as a commercial aircraft or military aircraft, but if something's moving very slow and it doesn't seem to be doing anything, a lot of times you won't even assign a tracking number to it, just because it could be some sort of weather anomaly, it could be a squall, it could be so
right.
When it doesn't seem to be a threat to you, you just don't pay that much attention to it. So it's interesting after these new laws came in, and they basically tapped on everybody's, on the military's foreheads and said, hey, boys, start paying attention to this stuff. Start logging this stuff. So everybody's tuning their radars different. It's like, oh, man, these things are popping up everywhere.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, and then, the Air Force, just to round it out, I mean, which one was your favorite branch that you served in?
So I was indoctrinated in the United States Army, and that's the way I feel. That's who
tattooed on your soul is what it still is. Right.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I was actually a combat arms training and maintenance instructor for the Air Force. So I was a range master. I did all the small arms stuff up to a Mark 19 and like 81 millimeter mortars and stuff like that. They wanted me to be that's security forces in the Navy. In other words, that's like the Air Force.
Right.
That's like the Air Force's MPs.
Right.
but they have different roles and different branches within security forces. And I was a range master for them.
Okay, so we're gonna pull all of that together, and your research into Roswell, your work as a police officer, Army, Navy, Air Force, and we're going to start right there when we come back with Greg Lawson, the paranormal detective, and I'm gonna ask you then what parallels you see out of Roswell and this whole Michigas coming up next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Balloons going up, 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 and whatever else is up there that we're looking at. We're talking with Greg Lawson, the paranormal detective. And we're going to call on his experience as a researcher in the paranormal as well as his years in the military to reflect on what are the parallels between the Roswell balloon story and this one, and perhaps even more specifically about some of the other aspects of the story that may be serving as kind of a dodge for what else is going on in the country right now. On Coast to Coast AM, this is Ian Punnett. All right, so you've had all these real-world military experiences, law enforcement, boots in the ground, technology in the air and land and sea, and you've been a researcher in the paranormal for years. So, Greg Lawson, what do you see are there any parallels at all between this thing we're doing right now, this sort of weird proxy war we're doing about balloons with China, and Roswell?
Yeah, I think so. I think that the government has a motivation to kind of slow this thing down a little bit. I don't think they know quite what is going on. They can't put out too much information, although Congress is now demanding that they share this information and put this stuff out. But bottom line is governments need secrets. They have to have secrets. I know that sounds very not good to some people, but there's things that we need to do, and they need to remain secret. And there are people in the world that would like to take our stuff, and so we have to protect that. And that's one of the things is, through masking, through deception, through wagging the dog, right?
Right.
And so I think there's a lot of that stuff going on right now.
But wait. So governments need secrets, but we also know that governments use that excuse to cover up stuff it just rather not deal with, right? I mean, the secret is we don't want to deal with this. So that's the secret, is like we haven't figured out what our opinion is. That's not the same as saying we need to keep this private to protect you.
Yeah, right. And they don't want to look silly either. And they want to look like they're in charge and that they're protecting us. And, we don't let missiles go in our airspaces. And we typically don't let any kind of unauthorized aircraft in our airspaces, but we're not smart enough to keep balloons out. Because maybe our radars were not tuned to track them, or we weren't taking them serious or whatever. But now, or maybe
we didn't care. That's the other thing. We just didn't care because they were like, yeah, well, whatever you can get from a balloon, have at it, China. There's it wasn't worth it. I saw something in the Wall Street Journal, I don't know, like 2 days ago that said, if we shot down, this has all raised all this awareness about balloons in the atmosphere. And if we actually bothered to shoot down every balloon to figure out what it was afterward, that we'd go broke firing off these $400,000 missiles everywhere because they are everywhere, and we don't always know what they are, but we also know what they can't really do. So we jammed up the signal, theoretically, so they say, so that there was no transmission possible of whatever data was being collected. So the balloon became essentially, just a boat anchor floating in the sky. It had lost its function. It still had its form, and it's floating, and it's whatever. Now I go back to Roswell, though, because, the America, when the crash happened, this notion of a weather balloon, the fabric involved, the infrastructure of it. These are military balloons, and something which the Pentagon has returned to a couple of times to explain, yeah, it really was just a balloon. But what does your research tell you about Roswell that makes you believe that story's not true, but maybe these balloons really are just balloons?
So let me take you back to my process a little bit. Roswell has been going on since 1978 when Stanton Freeman kind of reopened the whole thing. And they've just been haphazardly running and grabbing anything they could, saying this is evidence, this is witness testimony, this is this, and they're just gathering up, almost in a panic state, right? Just getting as much as they can, which is great. But you need to vet your witnesses, you need to vet your circumstances and your evidence and all that. So I get to work on the backs of great men who have already gone and conducted these investigations, and I get to take their information and then bring it into 2018, and I get to use the techniques and tactics of analyzing this information based on new ways of gleaning the truth out of that. So that's where I went. I took the whole thing and I said, okay, I got to throw all this stuff out because all of this stuff would be impeached because they did not, properly vet their witnesses, and so on and so forth. So I really boiled it down to who really matters, what really matters, supportive evidence of what all that stuff is. So saying that, you have to go to the very first time that the public learned anything, which would have been, the Roswell Daily Record, but not them. It was the actual press release that was released from the Roswell Army Airfield, which said it had a flying disc. They gained possession of a disc. The flying object landed. The ranchers stored the disc. The disc was picked up, was inspected at the Roswell Army Airfield. It doesn't say anything about debris, rubber,
fabric,
sticks, aluminum, foil. It doesn't say any. That's coming straight from Colonel Blanchard's office. And then snap, the next day, we got some sticks and rubber and a balloon.
Right. And unusual markings, but that was about it. Right? So, but that's an interesting thing. So first of all, by the way, that kind of makes you, and this is kind of cooler, you're kind of the cold case paranormal detective.
Well, my website is coldcaselegends.com.
Yeah, which is really cool. I mean, I think that, and that's how you describe it, and I think that's just really neat. So you, in being able to go back over some of this, you're able to bring new forensic techniques to it. You'll be able to take a more modern approach to the analysis. All right. Now, but this is where when we get a press release and then it gets printed and there's local people and they, to some degree, verify having experienced something. But then some of that also that's not part of the original press release begins to run away from the story.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so what's the runaway part? So here, if we just stayed with what's in that original military press release, cool. But then we start to build the legend on that, and that's where it kind of ends up, undermining its own credibility.
Well, and like a lot of media outlets will do, they will sensationalize things. So they sell their papers or their, memberships or whatever it is. Roswell Daily Record, turns flying disc into flying saucer because that's cooler. And they go from there and then paint this great picture of things that were happening in and around Roswell at the time and how Major Marshall got involved and Dan Wilmot saw the fiery object in the sky that flew by a couple of days before that. And, they paint this experience for everybody. And from there, it was all pretty much contained there in Roswell. Now, a bunch of this stuff obviously went over to AP, and the poor sergeant, the poor sheriff,
right,
that had to deal with all that stuff.
right.
People calling him from overseas asking about it, and at the Army airfield at that time just basically kicked all that information to him. Said, yeah, if you want to know anything, call them. We're not telling you anything.
Right.
And so, oh man.
But then you get then you start to get the whole thing about recovering bodies.
Yeah.
How did that develop? Just historically, as you look at it as an investigator.
So that was much, much later. All right. So we're looking at Roswell in 1947. It gets wrapped pretty quick, right? They say, it's just a balloon. There's nothing to see here. Go about your business. We have things to do. You're irritating us. You're distracting us. We have things that we need to take care of. So everybody just kind of goes about their business. And it was 31 years later before, Jesse Marcel started talking to some people. Stanton Freeman found out about it, interviewed Jesse, and the thing cracked back open. All of a sudden, there's all these people who are like, oh, yeah, I remember when all that happened.
Right.
And here we go. Now, the Air Force, in the 1994 investigation and their subsequent 1995 release of their report, if you want to talk about that, we can go there too. That gets very, very compressed, and they talk about time compression. And there were some experiments that were going on with Operation High Dive and I think Excelsior, and where they were dropping dummies out of balloons and out of probably aircraft also, and these dummies would fall to the ground and parachute to the ground, and these were very, very high altitude experiments that they were doing. And the Air Force was saying that the people that saw these dummies got them confused with the 1947 Roswell incident. And these dummies would have been used 1953, 1950 to 1958, something around there. And so it would have been many years after the Roswell incident happened that these dummies would have been seen by anyone. And they could have been seen. I mean, they were dropped, and depending on the where they were dropped, where the balloon was, there was a good chance that civilians would actually see these things. And that got confused with people talking about that they were very small. They were little dummies, and they were small-bodied things. But what was happening is in World War II, people were getting that confused because the United States Army would drop small little dummy paratroopers with parachutes as a distraction device to the Germans. They would go do that. So I think that might have been a crossover why they said they were smaller, because the ones that they used in New Mexico were full size, big dummies, and they were carried in body bags. People are like, why in the world would you carry something like that in a body bag?
That's interesting, yeah.
Well, the body bag was the right size, and it's easy to manipulate. They got handles, and what do you want me to carry it in?
Right, that's right. What else you got?
Yeah,
right.
I mean, that's kind of...
So it's a conflation of those things, but we still go back to the original press release, and there's so much rich soil there, and there was no discussion yet about it being a weather balloon, yet that's kind of still the official line, isn't it, from the Pentagon to this day?
Well, no, they've moved past that.
Okay.
It's really interesting. So something about the psychology that we know of deception today is there are certain things that human beings do that they cannot help not doing. It's a very interesting phenomenon. When you're being deceptive, there's so many things to watch out for that will give you away. One or two of these things are going to pop out. And it doesn't mean you're lying about what we're talking about. It just means you're being deceptive, possibly being deceptive about one particular thing, right?
Right. Yep.
And so when I get to come back in, forensic statement analysis is something that I've been really interested in and I've taken multiple classes in. Well, it's great for cold case, right? Because most of the cold case stuff is all written. And, all the statements, the transcripts, the reports people wrote and everything. So I can take all of that stuff and I can use forensic statement analysis to evaluate those particular writings. And, man, things pop out like crazy and big red flags on a lot of stuff. That might not be because they're lying about the aliens and the spacecraft that they recovered. It might be that they're being deceptive, trying to hide whatever it is they were actually doing. So it'll show that they're lying, but I'm not sure what they're lying about.
Yeah.
And that was the great – go ahead.
No, that's actually really – sorry, go ahead. I was going to amen you, but you had more, so go ahead, finish.
Well, and that was the thing. When I first started writing the Roswell book, I've had people go, what in the world are you doing? Why are you doing that? How crazy do you have to be to have a public statement about Roswell, because you're going to be attacked from every side, right? And I'm like, I don't know. I started researching it, and 14 years later, I'm like, I got to write a book.
Sure.
And so when I wrote the book, I really didn't know where I was going with it. I'm like, all right, I'm doing this. Well, what I found out is the culmination of the whole thing. The Air Force is still lying to us about all kinds of stuff.
Right.
I'm telling you right now, man, I would not have wanted Colonel Weaver or wouldn't have wanted McAndrews' job in doing that. I think it would have been very interesting, but I wouldn't have wanted it.
But are they lying because they're trying to create a cover story or to restore honor back to the Air Force for something which ultimately they don't even know what they're covering up?
Right.
I mean, it's a process lie as opposed to an intentional lie where you know the truth and you're not going to reveal it. You're trying to make up something as you go along that somehow will realign it so it resembles truth.
Yeah, and that gets real complex. But I can say this. Out of the first report that came out, right, 1994 report, it's almost 1,000 pages long.
Right.
98% of that report has nothing to do with anything.
Right.
So right away I look at that and go, okay.
Yeah.
A lot of smoke and mirrors here, right?
Right. Well, hold on to that. It reminds me of an expression that somebody taught me once it's like a German expression, which is, as parents, you should spank your children every day. If you don't know why, they do. Now, that's wrong. I'm not saying we actually should, but it does speak to a kind of a truth that we may not know what it is that they know, but there still should be repercussions for them not telling us on Coast to Coast AM. So we're talking with the paranormal detective, Greg Lawson. Boy, is he insightful. We're kind of taking a look at this whole balloon thing, right? But from a different perspective, and that's how often our government has or has not actually used balloons, how often balloons are used as an excuse. We know that J. Allen Hynek frequently cited balloons as a way of discrediting UFO reports, which later on he would say had some validity after all. But he was under a lot of pressure from the Air Force to find a way to kind of tie it all up in a bow. So, whatever it was, the government says very likely we'll never know what 3 out of the 4 of those were. Still not willing to say that they came from China. Still not willing to rule out the possibility that they could have some other kind of paranormal explanation. Not saying it was, but they're not saying it's not. So we'll get to that next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Greg Lawson, I can't tell you how much I'm enjoying this conversation. The Paranormal Detective can be linked up on our homepage at coasttocoastam.com. Take a look at the books. Take a look at kind of his whole approach, his background in the military, and that shirt he's wearing on his About page. What was up with that?
That's not a shirt, sir. That's a jacket.
What?
Yeah, you need to get one of those. That's what I
no.
Whenever I preside over a wedding, that's what I wear.
What? That thing? Really? On the About page? Are we talking about the same thing? Because you have short sleeves and a black pocket.
No, maybe that's. I'm thinking of the one that y'all threw up on the.
Oh no, it's okay. Website. No, it's like this camouflagey kind of shirt with the black piping and everything, and that's what I was. That was a shirt I was looking at. I don't know. Where does one purchase a shirt like that? It looks like something from the Philippines or something. It looks like something like it had a very specific
I know what
purpose.
You're talking about? Yeah. No, that's actually very. It has pictures on it of haunted Spanish stuff.
Oh, okay, that's cool.
All right. And yeah, it's real creepy. It's real interesting.
Right. Well, I accept that. Yeah. All right, I'll still never wear it, but I accept it. It looks good on you. All right, so love where we're going with this. So, as we were talking about it going to the top of the hour, I was trying to come up with a better example. And I think what's interesting about when you're talking about deception is something, I'm going to give this parallel. Maybe you can relate to this. So I think of Alfred Hitchcock, and the characters as he designed them didn't go to the police because they had something else to hide. So it wasn't like they were innocent of the thing they were being charged with, but they were always afraid of getting busted for that other thing. And that's what kept them from being able to say, do what, anybody who's watching a Hitchcock movie, go to the cops, call the cops. But you can't if you're afraid in investigating what you're trying to get them to investigate, they end up finding something else.
That's right. I was interviewing a guy for about 4 hours on a homicide one time, and everything he was telling me was cue of deception, just deception, right. deception. And I'm just sitting there. We're just having this conversation, and I'm not hitting him hard. I'm just gathering information and watching how he communicates. And I was like, this guy did this. This guy did this. And come to find out, nope, he did not. But what he did do is have a whole bunch of weed in his car that he did not want me to look at.
So, that's exactly right. It's like the government doesn't want you to find its weed. And so that's why it's deceiving us on this other stuff.
Those damn people.
Well, all right. So, okay, so let's even broaden it past Roswell, because, again, it's just hanky, this whole thing about the balloons and about surveillance and about – so as you investigate the paranormal and you try to figure out what is truth, as your cold case investigator, taking a look at some of these and re-examining them, what insight does it give you over the way the government generally behaves and when something is amiss?
All right, so that's a big, broad subject there. But when you're looking at a case initially, it has a lot to do with what your first impressions are on it. Also, you need to prove what you can prove. In a paranormal case, you're going to look at it in a way that what normal thing could have caused this? What normal thing could be happening that would lead these people to believe that a paranormal incident happened? So you go there, and people are always looking for orbs. They're looking for grandma knocking the plate over. They're looking for, the ghost. They're looking for whatever that is. I don't look for any of that. if it appears, and what I mean by appears, if evidence shows up that's going to be in a paranormal avenue, then there it is. But what I look for is what's missing.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that will be a big red flag, especially if it's intentionally missed. So I know you're kind of steering us away from the Roswell thing, but
no. You can go back there. I just wanted to broaden it, pull the lens back a little bit. But go ahead.
I'll turn it back over there. And when you look at that 900, almost 1,000-page report,
right,
it's the key things that are missing. You go, are you guys idiots?
Right.
How could you not include the word Colonel DeBose in your report?
Right.
He was a key player in this, and you don't refer to him one time.
Right.
And it's bizarre because when I look at that initial report, if I would have paid for that, so I am currently a director of training of a large metropolitan law enforcement agency in Texas. And so I'm over all curriculum. I have to, ensure that all that is getting taken care of and
Sure.
properly done. If I had these guys do this investigation and they brought that product back to me, they would have been pulled off of the unit. I would have sent them back to training. I would have put them on a developmental action plan. I would have sent them to schools on how to do interviews and how to document interviews. I would have retrained these guys. It's that bad, in my opinion. And I have respect for both of those gentlemen that ran that investigation for their service and their dedication and whatever it is they were told to do.
But they were out of their depth. They just,
it was horrible.
Right.
And
there's no real how much training can you actually get for that, though?
Well, conducting just a basic investigation, it doesn't matter whether you're investigating insurance fraud or whether you're investigating a murder. There's still standard investigative practices that you do for every one of those things. So you can kind of check the box, make sure that you have obtained as much information from the investigation as you possibly can, and you don't taint the investigation. I've gone into reports before, where a case, something has been dismissed from a murder and said, no, it's an accident. You go in there and you're like, well, this detective is giving this person their alibi. What are you doing?
Right.
A good example, a really stark example of what the Air Force did was in Trukowski's interview. He was one of the scientists for the Mogul Project. They go to talk to him, and they front-loaded every bit of their questions with information.
Right.
Everything. They would tell him what he was supposed to say and say, okay, right? And then he would go into it. And these guys seem like they came in with this authority of, we're the Air Force, we're professionals, we're officers, we're in charge of this. We've done our due diligence. I mean, he tells him, look, Jim, and he's talking about McAndrews. He says, Jim has read approximately, or he's gone over millions of pages of various archives and repositories during this, investigation, less than a year investigation. When you're an old man and you're sitting there talking to a colonel in the Air Force and he tells you that, you go, okay, well, I guess so. Well, he would have had to have read 110 pages a day, 40,000 pages a year for 25 years to go over 1 million pages.
Right.
But he's gone over millions of pages, which that means to me 2 million or more.
Right.
But that is what they would do when they would go in and do these interviews. Is they would front load everything, and then they would put everybody in a position where it's a technique of manipulative exaggeration. So you wouldn't question my dedication, and my work ethic, because that would be an insult. When I tell you what I've done, you wouldn't argue with that. You just, oh, okay, yeah, I guess so. Because of your authority,
I teach, I think this is broader than this. And I think there's a piece of human nature about the discomfort of certain types of interview situations. Because as I teach students to be, even to be good sports journalists, the two things I always say is don't ask what we call two-bucket questions, right? Where you have, like, if the interviewer has a marble, you give them a chance to drop it in bucket number 1 or bucket in number 2. Don't do that. Ask an open-ended question which forces them to emote. That's interviewing 101. But there's something about when a lot of, especially people who are, it's not a matter whether or not they're trained. They feel a kind of empathy for the person who's being asked the question, and they want to save them.
Or they're arrogant.
True.
And they're going to manipulate this investigation.
That's true, too.
They wanted to do.
No, that's totally true. But, I mean, in this case, too, maybe sometimes we don't know whether they're so embarrassed for the person they're asking the question of that subconsciously they want to save them.
Right.
And it may come off as arrogance. It may, in fact, be arrogance. It's like when people tell me all the time, well, I'm a terrible interviewer, and I agree 100% because I don't like to ask questions. I like to say stuff, and then I wait and see what the other person says. Even questions themselves are rarely clean enough to get a really good original self-reflective answer. Most of the times we ask questions in such a way which, even very subtly, we're guiding a particular direction out of.
Sure. It absolutely matters how you ask your question. I tell that to people I tell that to officers all the time. You know, do you ask in a situation, you ask how fast the two vehicles were going when they touched each other?
Right.
How fast were they going when they collided into each other? How fast were they going when they smashed into each other? How or careened into each other? It matters.
Verbs matter.
You do that.
Yeah.
And the studies show that just those words right there will increase the speed 5 to 15 miles an hour.
Oh, that's
just
so
like
interesting.
Adding some things in. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And so it absolutely does matter.
So, out of curiosity, because of your interest in these paranormal cold cases, as somebody who oversees a curriculum for, police training, do you think you would have been able to get the job that you have now if you were doing a book about Roswell 30 years ago and that was on your resume when you went in to apply for a training gig?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Yeah. The MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, that most law enforcement, most government officials will take that test. It's 560 questions or something like that.
Yeah. Most of them redundant.
You lose points when you say things like you believe in transubstantiation, or you believe that you've seen an anomalous, it's possibly a spirit, or you believe in spirits, or you believe in extraterrestrials and things like that. You actually lose points on that. So it's very, very interesting.
But you also, on the MMPI, you also lose points if you say, I never lie.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the things they'll ding you for, because they're like, wait, everybody lies a little bit. You can't say I never lie. And then the redundancy questions are always interesting on that, too, because if you think you've fooled the test in one way, it'll reframe the question in a way that you may not expect, and then you give away your true position. But even there, like the idea of this used to be, this would have been like third rail stuff for applying for a job. And the stigma's changed. So when did it change, you think, in your field for you?
Well, so for me, I'm a little bit unusual in the fact that I established my career and my credibility or my integrity which I have damaged during my career.
Just by being on this show in the last hour.
Yeah, well, but I mean, I think there's a lot of cops out there that can be really straightforward, really pristine all the time, as best as they can, at least in their heart, not intentionally doing anything. But I established that before I came out of the paranormal closet.
Yeah.
So once I've established that, and I say, oh, yeah, this is what I do over here. And the funny thing is a lot of people, I have people, detractors that say, oh, you're just a debunker. And then I have it on the other side of, you're crazy, a ghost hunter.
Right.
And so, I just shrug my shoulders and go, you know what, I'm a professional investigator, and I apply it to legends and paranormal incidents, and I try to determine what in the world's going on. So.
You'll never remember this, but I recommended. This is really weird. I recommended you for a job about 10 years ago. Never met you.
Right?
Yeah, I was serving as a consultant for a TV show, and it was one that never got off the ground. But they were putting together a team of investigators. And I was sussing around, and I'd asked some people, and I came across your name. And I was particularly attracted to the law enforcement military background and the fact that at the time I think you were already teaching. I can't remember that for sure, but I remember you were involved in some sort of administrative role and that you were open to this. And I think we actually exchanged emails before I passed your name along.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. No, it was cool. But that's kind of the interesting, again, part of it on the other side is when you're looking at these types of shows like the ones that Dave Schrader's doing or the Travel Channel, other stuff, that plays to their advantage because it means that you're not coming at this with an agenda where you're willing to do anything just to avoid having a real job, right? And that you're not just trying to, which a lot of people in this business, they get into it and they realize this is fun. And what do I have to keep doing? What do I have to keep saying to keep getting paid? And that just, there's nobody I really like to work with under those circumstances. So,
no, I really like my real job. I understand the terrain. I know how to navigate. I understand where we sit between politicians and the legislature and the citizens and the good people and the bad people and all that stuff.
Well, you're a polymath. Yeah. You're a polymath, and it's pretty obvious. All right, so we're not going to get to questions yet, but we'll do that next hour. We're not done with Greg Lawson. I do want to ask about another one of his books, though, before time runs out, and we'll do that next, coming up on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Apparently they're everywhere. Now, like with every passing day, we find out more about the balloons that are up there, either from our own government or from others. But I think we ably looked at that through the eyes of a seasoned Roswell investigator in the paranormal detective Greg Lawson. But it also, on his page, it lists another book, which harkens back to a conversation we were having not too long ago. And we'll get to that next before we get your calls on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Well, one that long ago that I had on my friend Leslie Rule, the daughter of Anne Rule, the queen of true crime before she passed. Leslie's book that we had her on was a compendium of her stories that she'd collected across the country, haunted in America, which, as I was looking at actually the other day for something, I was reminded of the conversation we had on the air about, I was trying to get Leslie to, and I mean, I'm not holding her responsible for this because it's a little confusing, but exactly what and how do we codify the creation of a ghost? Like, what is a ghost? And Greg Lawson spent some time in his book, Diaries of a Paranormalist, came out a couple of years ago, where you go to the military sites, battlefields, and cemeteries among some of your favorite locations, correct?
Right, yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, I know you've done some of the ghost hunter stuff, and that's cool, but I can't figure out what the mechanism is for ghost creation. And before you answer, Leslie and other people will often talk about how ghosts are kind of confused spirits that are left over from a time when they were enjoying a physical life, and then suddenly they kind of remain in this confused state because their life on Earth was truncated and they've yet to make the move into the next realm, etc. And I made the comment then, and I've brought this up several times, well then, theoretically, every battlefield in America, or the world for that matter, should be the most haunted place. Because if there ever was a time when somebody dies wondering, is this it? Is this all there is? Is this how I go? It would be, you know, when you're charging a hill, or when you get knocked off your horse, or, you know, stabbed with a sword, or however you went. That nobody dies on a battlefield going, yeah, that's about right. You know, I mean, in that sense, we would expect all of those souls to be unrequited in their life on Earth. Is that your experience when you go as a paranormalist to military sites, battlefields, and cemeteries?
See, a good example of front-loading your questions there.
Yep, I did. But I was trying to bring you the context of what I hone in on that, because I'm all about the military, and I think that's great, but I would think that that's where, if you had like special ghost goggles, you'd look out over a battlefield and there'd be thousands of people sitting around going, what the hell happened?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So obviously we really don't know what, you know, creates that. If there was a mathematical formula to, you know, this plus this equals ghost, well, you know, it seems that it has to be something that is a very emotional thing. But taking that out, what if it's just, you know, a residual haunting? What if it's some sort of time slip, and we're actually seeing that person in real time of what they're doing, and we get an image of that somehow? Whether it's, you know, if it's a spiritual thing where, you know, the people believe that, like you said, they're just confused and they don't know which way to go. So that's where the mediums come in and say, okay, we're going to help them cross over,
right?
And, you know, all that sort of thing. You know, and do they? There's examples of apparitions seeming to behave along with the alive people, you know, like it's some sort of intelligent haunting, and things are happening. Some are not. Some just are like the repeating specter kind of thing. They're just, you know, every once in a while somebody sees somebody walking down the hallway, and that's all that.
Right.
It's
all
like
a loop.
Image ever does.
Right. Yeah.
So whoever figures this out, you know, will probably be rewarded in many different ways. I don't think we know what it is.
Well, this is why in theology, right? And I have this, you know, pesky little Master's of Divinity degree, but in theology, there is no accounting for this, and so in that way, I can't find a way to make it fit into some sort of religious rubric. It just exists, you know. It's something. And I'm not saying that ghosts don't exist. I'm not saying that there haven't been ghost stories in my family. I'm not saying any of that. Yeah, but I've yet to figure out, like, how does this actually happen? What's the? Is there a kind of ecosystem for ghosts? Because, as you say, if a medium can say, I'm going to help this person cross over, it's stuck. Well, then why isn't that God's job? Wouldn't that be God going, hey, Bob, you know, the bridge over there, idiot, you know, come and join us? What are we doing relying on other people to do it?
Yeah, and that's if you believe in a traditional, you know, let's say Christian,
Judeo-Christian.
If you believe in that. If you get in that box, then yes. If you just believe in spiritualism and that our existence just goes on, it transcends death and goes someplace else, or we can talk about, if it's
energy,
reincarnation,
right.
All that kind of stuff. I think it's, the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, the spiritualist movement that came forward, and that was very popular for a while until it just got overexposed with frauds.
Right.
It was something very interesting. It was something very interactive, and people were trying to make sense of their life and where they're going with it. And so, there's just so many different ideas, and everybody kind of thinks that their idea is the right one.
Well, I'll just accept one that has a kind of logic to it, right? And I'm not even trying to be super rationalist, but just for what you just said, this whole theosophical and all of the spiritualism and all the other stuff that happened in the late 19th, early 20th century, and it was exposed, essentially burdened, broke under, its own weight with all the frauds that were in it. I think the same thing is true today. And I've said this to Dave, and I've said this to Dave Schrader, our mutual friend, and I've said this to a lot of other people. How is it that these ghost shows, show up in a building, and it's like lights, camera, cue the ghost, and the ghost comes by the camera at exactly that moment, or kicks over a can or blows out a candle or something like that? That's where I start to feel like, wait a second. I mean, if we're to believe in that type of a ghost, then you got to show me how it is that isn't something that we can control. Like we're not, like we're a vet for ghosts, right? Or something like that.
Right. And when we look at this, is we're assuming that ghost, I'm using air quotes, is paranormal, right?
Right.
It's something outside of our physical experience, things that we can touch or measure. It's something else because of 18, 20 years of ghost shows, it's kind of the same thing over and over and over and over.
Right.
Right.
Did you hear that? Did you hear that?
Yeah. Exactly.
Drives me nuts.
But anyway. And when I say that, then I have people look at me and go, "Oh, you're a debunker, you're a cynic," or they'll call me. Actually, they don't even call me a cynic; they call me a skeptic. And it's like, absolutely, I'm a skeptic. As an investigator, you have to be, because you're going to weigh your evidence based on your skepticism of the validity of that evidence. So the thing that people get confused with is way far at the left side is cynic, way far at the right side is true believer, going to believe anything that anybody tells you. But the skeptic is floating around between those two based on the evidence that they gather, based on their experience, based on their training, based on what they see. And my question is are we already tuned in to pick up on paranormal, and we're just classically conditioned by our parents to put it away?
Yeah,
because as a very, very small child, you see something in the closet and they tell you that's not in the closet. You're just seeing things. There's no monsters. There's no, there's no ghosts. There's no this. There's no that. So they suppress. And pretty soon, all that stuff is just pushed out of you, and you're just dealing with your world.
Right.
But we know that there's a whole lot of other things that are happening right in front of me right now that the sensors in my eyes can't pick up on because it's not important to me, like those balloons we were talking about. There's all kinds of different types of rays, infrared, ultraviolet. We got cosmic stuff going on. If I could see all that, it would look like a snowstorm in front of me, but it's not consequential to my survival. So I did not evolve in a way that I would pick that up. All that's gone.
What would be your best example then of your experience where you're just using your subjective, just your own senses, just your own subjective presence around something where you feel like you had a takeaway that couldn't be explained with regard to a ghost?
Three things. One is deja vu, my deja vu experiences. And, of course, psychologists, psychiatrists can say, no, that this is what happened when you have a deja vu, and that's why you think of it that way. Well, okay, Mom, thanks for telling me that that's not anything important for me to pay attention to. But I choose to pay attention to it. Second one is synchronicities of the way things happen in a metaphysical sense. I've had experiential situations to where it would be akin to a religious experience, and we can go psychological on that one also, saying that by creating a cathedral and that way the sounds a certain way and the monks are chanting over there, and it'll put your brain into a very unique situation to where you feel different. So I can say that. And then the third one would be the correlation of evidence that I've seen that is so bizarre. And I'm just going to give one example. I was with Dave Schrader of the Paranormal 60 podcast. Yeah,
sure.
We were in Ireland, and
I remember when he went to Ireland. I remember this.
Okay. We were at a place called Lep Castle. It's very famous, supposed to be the most haunted place in Ireland, right?
Right.
Well, so I go up into what's called the Bloody Chapel, and I go up there and I set up some equipment, and I'm hanging out there. I spend all my time there, and in a hallway downstairs because I'm looking for a priest and I'm looking for a woman in red, right? And so because there's real good evidence that these people really existed and they were actually murdered in the castle. So I set my stuff up. We're there 4 or 5 hours, something like that. I gather all my stuff up. I didn't see anything. I didn't experience anything. It was a really cool place. I got to do some really good historical investigation while I was there. Good correlation of where the dungeon was, called the Nublet, that's up in the Bloody Chapel. Why would you have a dungeon in your chapel? It's just kind of bizarre. Anyway.
Yeah, it is kind of.
So
yeah.
I'm going on, and we go down, and we talk to Sean and Ann, his wife, and then we leave out of there. As we're walking out, Tammy Cote, one of the ladies that was with us, we're standing out in the yard. We decided to take a picture of Sean and Ann standing at the front door of Lep Castle. And she takes that picture, we leave, and about 3 weeks later, she's like, oh, my God, look at this. And we look, and there is a priest standing up in the window looking at us. Or he's not looking at us. He's looking out of the window. This is an image that is not like somebody standing in the window. It is. It looks like it doesn't look right, and it's also much, much larger than it would be if it was a real person. If it was a real person, it would be 12 feet tall or something like that.
Right.
But here's my correlation. Here's where I'm going with the math on this. I am at Lep Castle looking for a priest. I leave. We take a picture. We look at the picture, and it's got a priest in it. Now, I wasn't looking for a sailor. I wasn't looking for a ship's captain. I wasn't.
Right.
I could have been looking for all kinds of stuff. What is the correlation of? If we do the math, that is a miraculous thing that happened.
Right.
People say, well, that's really benign. And I say, yes, maybe that's how these rules work. Maybe, we can't, they're like, if they're there, why don't they just tell us they're there?
Right.
Well, obviously, if these things exist, there are some set of rules that does not allow them to directly communicate, or it is set up in such a way that we can't directly see them. So I revert back to, in our brain, what if we're already conditioned to be able to do this, or physically able to do this, but because of the way that we're classically conditioned, that goes away. But a few people do. It doesn't, like very strong mediums and psychics and things like that actually listen to what their brain tells them, and it's typically some sort of obscure thing that they come up with that it takes a while before it makes sense to you. And maybe that's where the imagery actually happens, is in your brain and not actually in front of you.
Okay. I accept that.
I don't know.
I accept that coming from you. and I accept. But see, it's so anecdotal because
Yes.
I mean, I've been around other mediums who tried to get me to give them information, and I won't be a cold read, right? I'm just not going to do it. So I just don't do it.
Those things and that's one of those things. The more you learn about this stuff, and you can a medium will pop up real quick.
Yeah.
As soon as they start doing a cold read, and it's
right.
It'll take you all of 15 minutes of reading online to figure out how to do that.
Right.
I can walk in and do some amazing things, and everybody thinks I know stuff. But that's not the situation, And so that's where I'm going with this is maybe that's why we're not picking up electronic evidence or physical evidence or whatever. Maybe all of this is experiential. Yeah. Maybe it's our interpretation of what is happening to us at that time is what the paranormal thing is.
Okay, so when we give the numbers here coming up in just a second, I have a remaining question, which is how often in law enforcement has a medium been accurate about something that they were calling you about to say, you ought to look here? I'll get that question in just a moment, and we'll give you the numbers for you to join the conversation with the paranormal detective, Greg Lawson. Enjoying this so much. Hope you are too. On Coast to Coast AM, this is Ian Potter. It is that we started the interview with Greg Lawson talking about the balloons floating over the United States and Canada, and then comparing and contrasting that with some of the balloons, both in his own experience as a guy who has served in the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, and a police officer, but also as a detective, a paranormal detective looking at cold cases like Roswell, where balloons was central to the narrative there, and often comes up in these UFO investigations. And we've had a great conversation along the way. Want to join it? Grab a number. We'll get there next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. While we're still lining up a couple of those calls, let me ask you, Greg, how often has it paid off to take a call from a medium as a police officer?
Extremely rare. You got Dorothy Allison up there in New Jersey. She's done thousands of cases. But I don't know the actual outcome of and how much of her influence. But, there's Professional Psychics United, which is a group. I want to say there's maybe 300 or something like that you can contact them, and they will volunteer their time in there. The ones that you have to watch out for is the ones that contact you and say, for $2,000, I can remove the curse and we'll find, your loved one or whatever it is. There's a psychic rescue team, I think is what they're called. And they will come in specifically for like trying to find missing people.
Right.
And that's really good. And law
has that ever paid off though, where they've said this person, they're in a, the abandoned Wendy's.
Yes, there's been a couple that are actually pretty good documented cases of where that happened. But I mean, if you look at the statistics, you live in an area, and there's one particular, federal park in your area,
right?
And this person liked to go camping, but they don't know where he went, and so this person could just take it. Well,
right.
I see them camping at this place, right. and actually in the case that I'm talking about, individual was actually murdered there. And so it was kind of a rare set of circumstances that brought that psychic in there to do that. As far as us, where I work, it's almost unheard of. I've brought psychics in a couple of times. But I only do that after I've run the entire gamut of the investigation. Right. So I have no place else to go. And then I, will then reference back to the psychics that have called in saying, I know what happened or whatever.
Right.
And then when you bring them in and vet them, there's certain things that you need to do to make sure that,
they're near water. That's, I remember one psychic telling me. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that was great. I see them in a bunch of trees. I'm like, no.
Okay. Thanks for pinning that down for us. West at Rockies, Howard is in Vancouver, Washington, on Coast to Coast AM for Greg Lawson, the paranormal detective. Go ahead, Howard.
Hello, Ian and Greg.
Hey, Howard.
I'd like to share an opinion with you and get a little feedback from you about the UFO subject. I believe that probably the most dramatic UFO incident of all time occurred in February of 1942. It's come to be known as the Battle of Los Angeles. Now, at that time, the United States had just entered the war, and the whole West Coast was prepared for some kind of an attack. The city of Los Angeles was surrounded by anti-aircraft guns, and one night, I don't remember the exact date, but they detected something coming in over the ocean. It was a huge oval-shaped object. It got over the city, and they all opened fire on it. There's a very famous picture, I believe it was in the Los Angeles Times, of this oval-shaped object. It's got about a dozen carbon arc searchlights trained on it, and there are anti-aircraft rounds bursting all around it. Now, nothing ever came of it. They never knocked it down. Apparently, the hysteria of the war at that time, just quickly, obscured that incident. But I do think that the government had developed a public relations protocol to deal with such a thing. And 5 years later, when the Roswell incident occurred, they put that protocol into play, and it's been in effect ever since.
Well, I don't know whether that's interesting. I don't know whether in between Roswell and the Battle of Los Angeles, which was like February of 42 or something. In between that, there's the sighting in Washington, right? And that was 46. And so that, all right, so let's get Greg on all of that. Greg, where are you with this?
So the Battle of L.A. was pretty awesome. As far as you can imagine, everybody's worried about the Japanese or whatever they were worried about at the time, and they were incarcerating Japanese citizens in the United States at that time, or at least there shortly after.
Right.
And shortly after that, it became very well known that the Japanese were trying to send incendiary bombs using balloons that would float over and then burst and catch fire, and they're trying to light Montana and Washington and all that stuff,
right,
and create more fires. So there's that reality, right? That stuff was really going on. Now, outside of that, how do we correlate, or how do we relate to an actual UFO? Let's say a extraterrestrial. Well, I know from operating in what's called the box down in San Diego, when we're doing flight operations off of San Diego, there is a ton of activity down there. When I say activity, I don't mean regular aircraft activity. I'm saying something else, and I'm not sure what that is. We would pick up different types of what appeared to be intelligently moving things at a very, very high rate of speed that didn't behave like a weather anomaly would. And it seemed to be on particular trajectories, and it would change those trajectories, and it would change altitude. And it's right off the coast of California. They would usually come down from Alaska, down across from Alaska, down Washington, Oregon, and into Southern California, past Baja, Mexico. And they're traveling at a very, very high rate of speed. So could that Battle of Los Angeles had something to do with one of those things? I don't know. All I know is that our anti-aircraft defenses didn't work very well because we didn't bring anything down and there wasn't any evidence of a balloon. I would think that flak would have gotten that. So I don't know, but it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was. I mean, whether it was anything, it certainly represented that we were on kind of a hair trigger, and that later on, the only casualty of World War II that happened on our own soil was as a result of a balloon that had a anti-personnel device that landed on a beach in Washington, right, on the coast. So it wasn't like again, we come back to balloons, but pretty low tech in some respects. But yeah, I mean, I whatever it was, we also know it wasn't what it was that we thought it was. And let's get back to the calls. Thank you so much, Howard, for getting us started. We'll go to Chaz on a wildcard line on Coast to Coast AM for Greg Lawson. Go ahead, Chaz.
Hey, thanks for taking my call, Ian. So I just want to pose a question. So given that there are you're talking about math and how we see things maybe from our brain or in front of us. So with the sheer number of people who have died, I mean, shouldn't more people see ghosts? I mean,
just statistically speaking, you mean?
Statistically speaking, yes. I mean, because even for me, I got an open mind. I never saw anything in my life, and I've been in plenty of places that would be creepy enough for it. But just with the sheer number of deaths, shouldn't we see more? And I think maybe that comes along with UFOs as well. There's just not enough reports with the same hundreds of people in the same place, only a few reporting it. So.
Well, I will say this, just for the record, everybody in my immediate family, only my youngest son has not seen a UFO. Mm-hmm. My wife did, and she was 100% skeptic. My older son did, and he couldn't have given a flip before he actually saw it. And my younger son, who so much wants to see a UFO, is the only one in the family who hasn't seen one. Greg, where are you with that?
Well, I was speaking more of the...
Go ahead.
No, I agree with him. When you look at the amount of very violent death, sad death, I mean, day to day we do pretty good, right? But none of us are getting out of here alive, right? So sooner or later we're going to let everybody down and we're going to die. Something bad is going to happen. And you look at stuff. I just did an event, or not an event. I just did an investigation, I guess, in Wellington, Washington, the site of a horrific train wreck. Actually, it was an avalanche that brought this train down and killed a whole bunch of people. And you would think that there would be ghosts there. I've been on plenty of battlefields. I spent 6 months almost 6 months in the Sinai Desert.
Right.
There's death everywhere out there. And so, maybe just a few people see this. Maybe they're the only ones that are really in tune to that. Or maybe it's just so rare that, it only pops up from time to time. I don't know.
Rick is in Dallas on Coast to Coast AM. Great question. Go ahead, Rick.
Yes, sir. Mr. Lawson, I'm up here in Dallas, and being a fellow Texan, growing up down there in North Austin, I wanted to ask you, I've been investigating Alamo for 20-plus years now, full-time. We got 2 books coming out on it, but I've been interviewed several of the Alamo Rangers that guard the compound at night, and I'm sure you already know all about this, but all the crazy stuff that they've seen and, there's been several over the years that just quit. They couldn't take it anymore. And I wanted to know if you had ever gone down there and did an examination, and if so, did you do a written report on it?
Yeah,
or if not, would you be willing to go and do an investigation?
I love that.
Yeah,
Greg?
I would absolutely be willing to. I've been down there dozens of times. I stay at the Minger. I stay over at the Emily Morgan. And I'm in incredibly intrigued with it just because, all those buildings are built on graves. There's graves all around there.
Right.
And nobody really wants to discuss that. And then there was the whole funeral pyre where they just piled up all of the Alamo defenders and just, basically burned them and left them there.
Sure.
And so once again, if you're doing math, that would be a place that would make complete sense.
Make a great TV show is what it would make.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. Call Dave Schrader. You try to make that happen for the Travel Channel.
Yeah. Yeah. So the Alamo is a great example of what all of y'all, everybody's been talking about is if there are ghosts, it would make sense that they would be there for sure. What happened there was horrific.
Brandon's got a theory on the balloon thing on Coast to Coast AM. Go ahead, Brandon.
Thank you so much, Greg and Ian. Great show tonight. Last night was amazing. Remember the Alamo? Ghosts, like animals and UFOs, they choose you. You don't choose them. But we should have a Coast to Coast investigation at the Alamo. At my theory, I was going to say the balloon, if they put like a horizontal camera with motion detection, which is not very expensive at all, or it doesn't take a lot of power, with LiDAR, which is like lasers.
Sure.
Eurasia Times recently put out an article saying the U.S. will be unveiling some craft in the next decade. That one is a drone mothership and one has cloaking. If the Chinese are assessing our cloaked craft or a secret space program, it'd be plausible that they could get the quantity of crafts entering and leaving the atmosphere based on just looking horizontally. Even if they were cloaked, I assume that you would still be able to detect like the light moving from the edge of the atmosphere.
As opposed to linearly from space looking down.
Yeah, and another idea, look, that's actually one advantage that balloons have, because thank you for reminding me. You had asked what do balloons have that satellites can't, and balloons can take higher resolution pictures. Another caller had an idea that if the balloon was in between the nuke silos and the satellite, perhaps they could figure out what satellites were connected to the silos.
That is also interesting. Greg?
Yeah. Yeah, and we're automatically assuming that these are surveillance balloons. How do we know that they're not some sort of dissemination balloon? How do we know that it's not actually delivering something over here as opposed to just being passive and listening or watching?
Yeah, we do make a lot of assumptions, and for that matter, we make an assumption if we say we think we have any idea what the DPI would be of those satellite cameras, that it's better in a balloon than it would be from space. I have no idea, because from what I hear, that's not true. But he may be right. I don't have any empirical data on that. John is in Ohio on Coast to Coast AM. John?
Hey guys, hi Ian, hi Greg. I got a question on this balloon thing. That they were using jets to fly by it, God knows how fast. Would it be feasible that if they would have been able to get like a propeller airplane or a helicopter to get up there and take a little bit, a slower view of this thing and maybe strafe it a little bit, or to puncture the balloon, or put a drone on there with an explosive and kind of control? It doesn't have to come down like boom, and just control the descent, where we could have got some of the information from that.
Yeah, with a BB gun. We should have done better than that.
I sat around and thought of 1,000 different ways to bring that thing down as opposed to that. The trick on the first one was its altitude. I think it was reporting at 60,000. I don't know how high it was when they actually shot it down, but we're not going to get a propeller or a helicopter or anything up to 60,000 feet. It's going to have to be some sort of jet aircraft or another balloon. Depending on your supply chain, I guess.
Well, and I heard, for that matter too, if we're talking about that, is that over Montana, some people are saying, well, this could be some sort of dispersal agent, and I think they think, well, they could be dropping something, and I thought, not from that altitude, because the jet stream just moves way too fast at that speed. Up there, in particular, all of that. If you dropped a paper airplane over Montana, it would very likely end up in Pennsylvania. I mean, it's not like that isn't just like a shaft that goes all the way straight down. That would be too much, especially if you're dispersing something in the form of something that's crystallized or atomized or something like that. Where are you with that?
Yeah, that's one of those things. I mean, I've heard people talk about it and they say, well, I mean, how effective would any of that be? How effective would that be? Well, 2 pounds of fentanyl would kill about 500,000 people.
Right.
So I'm not sure what, are they possibly dropping something that they can track and figure out how far it goes? I mean, I'm completely speculating on the other side of. I think there's been some really, really good people that have come up with ideas of why they would be looking and listening at us, but I haven't heard a lot on the other side of maybe this is more of an active thing.
Well, and I accept that to a point.
That.
But we're looking at parts per billion, and when you scatter something, even fentanyl at that, if you're dispersing,
I agree. I'm just saying,
that's the crazy part. It's like or for that matter, I mean, if something really toxic, something was like sarin gas, or there's some new poison that they have, and they want to track where people are just going to start falling over dead in the streets, that would be interesting. But it wouldn't be like an attack on Montana. I mean, that's the thing. It's just not at that height anyway. All right. But that's okay, because this is where we're going here for the rest of this hour. Can't wait to hear your questions for Greg Lawson, the paranormal detective, next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. This show all about that which we see in the sky, how we interpret it. The balloons are just the most recent example of that. Plus, we've got, Greg's amazing book on really the re-examination of the Roswell case from the standpoint of a seasoned investigator. Take a look at his website and on all of his different books by looking up to him at coasttocoastam.com. Many of you have been hanging on for a half hour. You'll be up first. We'll get to you next. And we'll try and get a line for you, too, to join us before the end of this hour on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Teresa's been hanging the longest on a wildcard line from Green Bay, Wisconsin on Coast to Coast AM. Teresa?
Hey, hello.
Hi.
Hi. So nice to talk to you, Ian. It's been a long time since I've gotten to talk to you. And Greg, you're awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, he was great, isn't he?
I just have a question for you about this whole moon being a red herring or, a false trail, if you will, because there's been, if anybody pays attention to anything else going on after this, what's been going on in the South China Sea with our navies and in the border of the international waters. And I can take my answer off the air. And
ultimately much more important, too, the South China Sea thing. Yeah.
It's like this moon, we all know that we're being observed, and wave, you're on camera everywhere, but
right.
So big deal. But what's going on elsewhere, I believe that's why I want to get your opinion on. So
could it be a red herring for Brett Favre going to Las Vegas?
Oh, man, been there, done that.
Great answer.
Wow.
Great answer.
Maybe Roger will get his dream and go back to California.
Is Superman still in his fortress of solitude like the last time?
It's a damn shame.
It's a pleasure. All right, go ahead, Greg. Where's your thought on that?
Absolutely, it is. Every time it seems like we have something very important that we need to be looking at, boy, they'll point that camera someplace else.
Right.
And it's real interesting to me because we have some very, very serious things going on in the world right now. Who won the Super Bowl? Everybody's real interested in that. But the tough things, the tough questions, the things that you have to look at and go, wow, hundreds, thousands of people are dying due to violence or famine or whatever it is.
Ukraine.
No. Let's see what the NBA is doing this weekend.
Well, but I think that speaks a little bit to something you said earlier, though. I think it's the complexity of all of this, and the government holds all the cards. I wish I knew. I wish I fully understood our position in and what our response should be to China's incursion into the South China Sea. I have an opinion, but I don't know whether in the end negotiations are already 20 steps past that. And what we do to keep the peace sometimes seems on the surface of it like ridiculous. But then later on you find out, okay, well, it kind of worked. It was the best option we had, whatever. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. During the whole COVID thing, who made the most money out of all that?
Right.
China. Right. They're building infrastructure. They own Africa. You can pretty much say that they could go in there and do whatever they want to at this point. The amount of infrastructure that they put in is ridiculous. While we were worrying about wearing masks and whether or not I was offending you by naming you the wrong name.
Right.
Or whatever. That's what we're concerned about. But man, it's
they play long ball in China, but they always have.
Yeah.
It's always been their philosophy to play long ball.
And the thing about it is, when you look at it, the last people they want to hurt is the United States. We're the ones that pay them. We pay them more money than anybody else. We have the largest economy, and so to use my example, to come over here and drop some sort of poison or whatever doesn't make any sense unless it's it turns you into a shopping zombie, and then that's a good thing.
Right.
That would be good for them.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know what their like you said, the long game. What would their long game be to hurt the United States? We're paying them.
Well, and they have all of this investment here, property-wise, that would only get devalued if our economy doesn't stay strong. So not only are they getting money from us, but then they're investing money back into our economy. And where would we be without foreign investment? I mean, we cap out at some point where we simply just don't have that many investors that are willing to invest in our own factories, invest in our own cities. They're looking to turn a profit faster because they don't play long ball, and the Chinese do. And that's always been that's a cultural, philosophical difference. I don't think will ever change. Go ahead, bud.
And they don't think about like environmental stuff or anything. They just do what they're going to do.
Right.
And
And so it has been for their own survival. I mean, that's how they've learned. That's how they acculturated survival with all of the invasions that happened on their own soil. East of the Rockies, Adam is in Pennsylvania on Coast to Coast. Adam?
Hello?
Hi, you're talking to the paranormal detective. Go ahead.
My name is Ed.
Oh, it says Adam. I'm sorry. But, okay. I like Ed. Go ahead, Ed.
Thank you. Ian, thank you so much for taking my call. And, Greg, just a quick comment, a question. Gunsight cameras and these sophisticated missiles usually have broadcast images as they're approaching the target. Why haven't we seen any pictures of these objects? We see what they look like. They have the pictures. They had them on probably their gunsight cameras on their jets, and they also probably had them images being transmitted by the missiles.
Yeah, that's really a good point. Yeah.
And like I said before, it's whenever I'm conducting an investigation, I'm looking for what I don't get. That is a big, red flag. It's like, okay, well, if this is okay and this is no big deal, why aren't you sharing what you have with me?
Right.
And why aren't we seeing that sort of stuff? And maybe we will. Maybe it's taking them a while to go through this intel that they're gathering from this. That could be it. Maybe they're just not releasing that footage, but they will. There's going to be a lot more released out of this.
West of the Rockies, Mark, whose real name is Larry, is in Los Angeles. Mark, go ahead.
Hey, Ian?
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Okay. I got a problem here. Back in 1990, between 90 and 92, there was a sighting west of LAX.
Okay.
And it's in the newspapers. I can't find it. Okay. There's proof. So there was a big orb, gigantic, right? And it went counterclockwise and shut off. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And I don't know how to find it,
All right. Well, let me see. I mean, I'm just doing a quick Google search because I'm kind of curious about that. Usually, it's something that recent, but there are a lot of stories that come out of Los Angeles. By the way, there is something really anomalous. That was talking about rural America, and it's always some guy named Buford or something like that. But that's not true. And in fact, Los Angeles gets, pilots report things over L.A. or LAX all the time. I'll poke around on that, but anything jump to your mind on that, Greg?
No, I was overseas then, so I wasn't really paying attention to anything that was happening stateside.
Okay, wait, there is something here that says there's something from Chula Vista in the L.A. Times, 1990. Yeah, November 18th, 1990, UFO sighting, just a blimp in the night, dozens of startled residents, and here we go with the balloon thing again, in San Diego called police to report a UFO, which turned out to be a blimp on its maiden advertising voyage, brightly lit in the night sky to attract attention. I don't know that that's what he was thinking, but that does at least coincide time-wise, and it is Southern California, even if it's much further south. But I don't know. All right, we got some other people we'll get to, though, but if that chimes with anybody, please let us know. Victor is in Oregon on Coast to Coast AM for the paranormal detective, Greg Lawson. Go ahead, Victor.
Hi, Greg. I was wondering, have you heard anything about Stevensville? And,
of course.
In Stevensville sighting in Texas?
Yeah, that's like one of the most famous of all time.
Yeah, that one's huge. And once again, when you have a sighting and you don't have any corollary evidence, what do you do with that? It's one of those things that happens in a particular period of time, and then it's not happening anymore. So it's just that one thing. But the cool thing about that is how many people saw it and how many people reported it.
Right.
I not to go off subject a little bit, but I used to skydive. I skydived for years, and I was up in Seattle at the Seattle Skydivers, and we were doing a night jump, and we thought it would be a good idea to let off an industrial sparkler off the strut of this airplane so that we could spot the airplane and guide it in to where it needed to be before the skydivers left out. And when we did that, needless to say, hundreds of 911 calls went into the different law enforcement agencies of a UFO and of a plane on fire and all kinds of stuff. So, it's the Phoenix Lights. We can have that conversation.
Oh, that's fascinating, though. Because it happened twice, right? And I think that's where part of the Stevensville thing is it wasn't just one night. It was a series of nights that exposed, and some people would say that area still gets them from time to time. But they were so tired of getting beat up by the press and that they decided we'll stop opening ourselves up for that kind of abuse.
And a lot of people see those, and it is pretty interesting. If you've ever been in a combat zone, you see that a lot.
Right.
Something very, very similar, and it's coming from flares that are being dropped, and depending on how they drop them, on the arc of what it looks, it makes it look like it's the front leading end of a giant spaceship.
Yeah, but so here's I would recommend.
How far away it is, also.
They did a deep dive on this new Hulu series on Stevensville, and you mentioned how many people saw it, and how many different people saw it from different perspectives, and I mean, what I thought was the most interesting piece, and I'd never heard this before, was the local publisher of the newspaper for that area. I can't remember what it was called. She was responsible for firing the reporter that she felt had spent too much time on that story. And they felt like that reporter just got upside down in that story. They gave her other assignments, and she didn't want to do it. The only thing she wanted to do was keep following up. And she said, I was a total skeptic. And it's like, oh, God, I'm sorry, we're going to have to let you go. It sort of hurt the whole community. But she was very clear about it that, we have other news to report, and we can't just keep reporting the story. And then the publisher said the very next night, after I fired her, I saw it. And she said, I never felt like a bigger fool, because she said, I saw what everybody saw. And I'm thinking, I just fired somebody who I didn't believe. I was totally skeptical. Now I'm a complete believer because I saw it. And so if it was, I think the only thing they thought was because the F-16s have been scrambled over that area and they were chasing something. Well, you don't chase a flare. Right?
No,
that doesn't make any
I'm
sense.
not suggesting Stephenville, I'm not suggesting that particular incident was that, but there are some that's reported out there that it's like, come on, guys, no, that's not what that is.
It could be
what that is.
Some retired guys from the 82nd Airborne strapping flares onto their boots or whatever, dropping from the sky just for kicks. All right, Robert is in Killdeer, North Dakota, probably our last call on Coast to Coast for Greg Lawson, the paranormal detective. Go ahead, Robert.
Yes, you guys have a great show tonight. It's been a wild ride. Of course, I'm in North Dakota, and we're around the missile silos all the time. We drive by them, we see them, we see when the military comes and they bring the big semi trucks and they load them and they block the roads, and so we see a lot of that. And what's interesting is on these sites there are no antennas, but there is this little kind of a cone-shaped dome, which is, we always presume that's the communication line to a direct satellite in space. And if you needed to intercept a communication, wouldn't you need to be in direct line of that beam that's going to the satellite? So if you're wanting to, get some information or download malware, you would have to be in direct line of the satellite. I just kind of wondered what you thought of that. And then before you go, I would also like to tell a little story about a week ago. That's been actually 15 days when they scrambled the B-52 bombers and what that experience was like. But go ahead and give me a little bit about what you think about the direct line beaming first.
Yeah, that would make sense. However, that's outside of my scope of expertise. I'm not sure what they're doing now. When I was in, we had some pretty amazing technology in between 1990 and 94. It was staggering, cool technology. That was like in the prehistoric age of computers at that
by
point.
Comparison.
Today, I can't even imagine what they're doing.
But also at the same time, I've got Sirius XM in my car. I don't have to have line of sight. I think I wonder how much has changed from. I get it under. Unless I'm in a tunnel, I get it has a way of finding me somewhere, anywhere. Well, Robert, you had a quick story, and then we got to go, so you got to make it fast.
Yeah, I'll make it quick. On the day we shot down that balloon, I was here at work, and heading southeast, there were 6 B-52 bombers, and they were flat out moving. Black smoke, climbing high in altitude. They had scrambled, and then, of course, we have some friends in Minot that said they scrambled a bunch of them north. And I called my wife and said, well, I hope I see you in the morning.
Yeah, really.
But you never hear anything about that. We see the B-52 bombers, and they're never full power, afterburners blowing the black smoke out like they were a week or so ago.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I live right near the base here, just outside of Manhattan, Kansas, and we get a lot of helicopter activity, and so suddenly when the helicopters are flying in formation like geese, we know something's up because that doesn't happen every day. So I totally get how that would get your attention. Well, I turn everybody again to coasttocoastam.com where you can link up to Greg Lawson. Thank you so much for stepping in tonight. It meant a lot to me, and I really can't endorse enough how much I would watch you and Dave Schraders and others do a show on the Alamo ghosts. I think that'd be really cool. Did you have some fun, Greg?
Yeah, it was great. Thanks a lot for having me on. This has been great.
Okay. Nice to reunite with you.
Yeah.
And you didn't even know it.
Yeah.
Check your email from like 10 years ago. You might see one from me if it's in there somewhere. All right. Very good. Thank you so much. All right. So I will be off for a month, but it's great shows coming up. Take a look on the website. And let's think spring here. I think we could all use some warmer temperatures and a little less volatile weather. And until we speak again, Deus te amat, and I do too.